What a great addition to our program this evening. Thank you to each one of you. Well, you know, some of you have probably made similar comments that I have made, especially over the last couple of years as I reach the age of 65, and I recognize it isn't so much about me anymore. You know what I'm saying? It's about those that come after us, our children, our grandchildren. Our hearts are burdened for these young people. We recognize, many of us, the immense blessings we have had, the privileges, the great freedom, the wealth that we have had in this great nation, so oftentimes, sadly, taking it for granted. But we see our youth, and our love is just deepened for them, isn't it? Well, here we are. We see these young people having these great teachings and these great opportunities. But one of the things that I really saw the first time I watched Curtis Bauer's DVD was, initially I was moved. It just didn't take very long into that DVD. And then I heard the voice of this man, and I sensed a passion and a great love for this nation and a great understanding of the grinding down of America. And then to also read that his movie was a great award winner at the San Antonio Christian Film Festival. And I thought, wow, rightly so. So it is such a privilege, and as I saw that DVD and watched it several times, and we've done our utmost to try to get this word out to people, to help them to understand the war that we're in, not just for our sakes as adults and for grandparents and even great-grandparents, but for our children. We need to understand so we need to know what to do. And Curtis, we're very thankful for you, and we look forward to you being with us not only tonight, but also tomorrow. For those of you that aren't aware of it, he'll be over at our auditorium at the ministry offices of ADA and Main Street, where Curtis is going to be showing the full-length DVD and also be able to present and field questions and discuss. We really look forward to that. Just offhand, as I'm introducing Curtis, how many of you have already seen that DVD? What's it? Oh my goodness, 65 years old, I certainly am. Well, a number of you have. It is well worth seeing again. Curtis, thank you. Come.
Thank you so much, Bill. I appreciate it. I'm thankful to be here. My family and I have been traveling all over the country. We've been on the road. We have a bus, and we've been on the road almost continually since about the beginning of March. We've been in about 35 states, just promoting the film, going to events like this 5 or 6 days a week in different states. And God has really blessed the efforts of just trying to get it out there. We feel it has an important message, and we're thankful for how He's blessed it. One of the main questions I get when I travel throughout the country is, what provoked you to make this film? I mean, what made you quit your job, take your life savings when you have 9 children, and use it making a film when you've never made a film before in your life? I mean, that's kind of almost crazy sounding when you think about it, but I really felt God wanted me to. It was one of those things that was crystal clear. He kept over and over again just pushing on me, you need to make this into a film. And so I had to learn how to make a film. I had to learn a lot of things, but it took us 2 years full-time as a family. It was a big homeschooling project for us, and we did it full-time for 2 years to finish this project. And we're thankful for how He's blessed it since then. I was a state representative in Idaho, and I'd been in the restaurant business most of my life, and so I've been so busy with that and raising my family, I wasn't as involved as I should be. And an opportunity came up where a representative stepped down, and I put my name in the hat because I felt I was supposed to, and God had the governor pick me to be the replacement representative. And from that, as I started to get into that and study more about what was going on in our country, many things I came across that I was not aware of at all, that shocked me. I could not believe how clearly those people and groups on the left had outlined their agenda to try to dismantle us from within and change us as a people on the inside. And in January 2008, I wrote a letter to the editor, as I did every month, on a different topic, and I picked My wife was just expecting one of our children, and she said, "Don't pick anything controversial." I was going to write on the Roe versus Wade anniversary and some of that. She goes, "No." I said, "What if I write on that meeting I attended back in '92?" And she goes, yeah, do that. That'll be good. Anyway, I did it. I wrote a letter. Back in 1992, I had the privilege of going to the Communist Party USA was breaking off a new group called the Committees of Correspondence. And it was at the University of California, Berkeley. And an older gentleman had asked me to go. And it sounded interesting to me, so I said, sure. I mean, because he wanted to see, he'd been studying communism his whole life. And he said, 1989, the Berlin Wall's come down. 1991, the Soviet Union's dissolved, and now this is the summer of '92, 6 months later, and they're forming this new group. What are they doing? And so I said, I'll go for you. So I went, and I sat there for 3 days in all these different sessions and breakout meetings and stuff, and they kind of laid out an agenda how they wanted to dismantle this country from the inside. And from their point of view, they wanted to do this because it is so evil and vile of a country, so unfair, so unjust. And hearing them talk about it was shocking in and of itself. But my first surprise came when I went into this meeting. There was about 1,400 people there, and I assumed they were all going to be college radicals, but they weren't. I kind of dressed that part because I assumed that I got a radical t-shirt, and it was all 50, 60, and 70-year-olds with briefcases, and this was very serious to them, and I thought, this is interesting. It's not what I expected at all. Anyway, through the course of that meeting, they laid out an agenda how they wanted to take down our free enterprise system, our families, and our traditional morality. And that's what my letter to the editor was about in 2008. And it just said, they had said they wanted to destroy our free enterprise system. They said they wanted to use the environmental movement to do that. And again, in '92, when I heard that, I thought, I didn't even understand how you could do that. How would an environmental movement destroy our free markets? But of course, 16 years later, in 2008, I'm sitting there as a representative. Bills are coming through the House, and businessmen are calling me, don't pass that thing, that'll wreck my business. And that's when the light went on. I hadn't even thought about that meeting in 16 years. And I thought, my goodness, in '92, the environmental movement was kind of a fringe movement of, the tree huggers. It wasn't a mainstream thing, but by 2008, it was the most powerful force in America, hands down. There was nothing else more important than the global warming issue. So that woke me up. Secondly, they said to undermine our families, they wanted to really keep pushing the feminist movement. They said, we got to get these women out of the home so we can get the children at a younger age. And we got to just get them discontent with marriage and motherhood and just get them where they're not even wanting to do that anymore. And then thirdly, for the last thing, for the traditional morality, again, this is in '92, they said, we've got to get Americans to accept homosexuality. If we can do that, the moral battles will be finished. And again, at the time, I was very unimpressed by the agenda. I thought, that's not going to happen in my lifetime. But 16 years later, in 2008, I'm sitting there as a representative, and I'm looking at all what's going on. And there was legislation, some hate crimes legislation at the national level that would make it illegal to even say anything against the homosexual movement. And I started to go, what in the world is going on? So I wrote that letter. I simply stated what was said at the meeting. I showed where America was today, and I said, it's time for Americans to wake up. And it blew up it was a feature story on the evening news. People were protesting at the Capitol, demanding I resign, and it just went on and on. But one of the letters that came in to the editor defending me was from an older gentleman, and it really impacted me. He said, what Representative Bauer says is true, but it is nothing new. That was all written in a book in 1958. And I called the gentleman up, and I said, what book is that? And he said, it's The Naked Communist by Cleon Skousen. And so I got this book, and I wasn't even born in 1958. And I got this book, and Cleon Skousen had been an undercover FBI agent, and what his job had been to go into all the communist cells throughout America in the 40s and 50s and just listen. Well, what are they talking about? What are they trying to do to subvert us from the inside? And so after he doing that, then he wrote a book on it. And in the book, he has a list of 45 current communist goals from 1958. And he said, these, of all the things they're talking about, these are the 45 key things they're talking about. Well, let me just tell you this. When I opened the book to that section and read that list and looked back at the front of the book, making sure it was really 1958, I have not had a moment in my life like that before where I was so stunned. My head was spinning. I said, this can't be true. They can't have laid this out in 1958, and this was 2008 when I first read this, 50 years ago, and we didn't do anything about it? How often does your enemy give you their entire plan ahead of time, and you just let them do it anyway? I was just stunned, and I'm going to read you just a few of these goals and explain some things about the battle we are in for this country and for truth and righteousness and morality and following God and his principles. There's nothing more important than the battle we are in right now. Goal number 17, this is 1958. Get control of the schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism, soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations. They've done all that a decade ago. Do you know just a year ago in the 2011 school year, the NEA, which is the National Education Association, the most powerful group in control of our public schools, they passed a resolution in their committees. It actually passed where they said they wanted to take October 1st throughout all our public schools to celebrate, you ready? Chairman Mao's successful communist revolution in China. A man that slaughtered estimated 50 million of his own people. And we're going to take a day throughout all our public schools to celebrate this wonderful leader. And it's such a wonderful thing he did. That's how radical the people are that are in control of our schools. Yes, there's a good teacher here and there. Yes, there's some areas aren't quite as bad as others, but the rottenness is coming from the roots up, and it is corrupt to the core. That is why they have successfully changed us as a people, because they have changed our children and our grandchildren. They have captured their hearts and their minds because we haven't taught them why they believe what they believe. We haven't explained to them the difference between good and evil and how to discern truth from error. We haven't done that like we should. And so if the first K through 12 years don't get them, when they go off to college, they're finished. Our own numbers say we're losing 85% of our children and our grandchildren after 1 year of college. 1 year. A couple weeks ago, I was in Minnesota, and we had a nice, it was a tea party meeting, and they had a room at the local college there they use once a month for their meetings. We showed the agenda, film, and afterward, like normal, we had question and answers. And one of the gentlemen I finally called on stood up, and he started to talk. He said, I just want to tell you, this film is brilliant. I cannot believe how you so clearly went back and found the roots of this Marxism and communism and socialism, penetrating the different institutions of our culture and influencing us from the inside out. He goes, I cannot believe you were able to dig all that out. It's incredible. And I thought, oh, that's a nice compliment. And he went through, talked a little bit more. He said, but I want you to know something. He said, I am a professor at this university, and I am a communist, and we will win because we are getting all of your children, period. And it was, some of the ladies actually started crying in the crowd. How could this be in our little town? And I said, what are you thinking? This is in every college in America. We've naively thought that things are the same as they've always been. Oh, I went to college and I survived, and it's totally different. There's probably not 10 decent colleges in the United States of America that a parent could send their child to and not be concerned that the main thing you're going to tell them is make sure you don't learn a thing going there, which is crazy. What's the whole point of education? You're supposed to be learning things and understanding how things work and why they work. But now it's gotten so bad where we want to get into the good colleges, so we tell our kids, yeah, go and we'll pay the $100,000 for your 4-year, college stint, but don't you learn a thing. But of course they do. You cannot be around that influence over and over without picking some of that up. It's impossible, especially if you haven't been trained hours a day by your parents for years and years and years of why you believe what you do. But it was a real wake-up call to those people there, even to myself, because it just hit home again. That's what they're doing. They've always known, every evil group, every evil person knows, you get the children, you have everything. Hitler, same thing. All he wanted was to write the curriculum for the school, be in charge of the curriculum. He didn't do anything radical at first. He just talked about patriotism and how great Germany was going to be. And, oh, by the way, we just want to be in charge of the curriculum in the schools. Because he knew if he got the youth, he had everything. And that's what they've used against us. Goal number 24. Listen to this. This is 1958 America. Eliminate all laws governing obscenity by calling them censorship and a violation of free speech and free press. Why is it our enemies understand how important morality and godliness is, and most Americans don't seem to? I was shocked by that. I go, how can they so clearly see we got to promote obscenity? Listen to Goal 25. They said, Goal 25, break down cultural standards of morality by promoting pornography in books, magazines, motion pictures, radio, and TV. They knew that pornography would rot us from within. We would destroy ourselves. They wouldn't have to fire a bullet on anything. They would just rot our entire country. One of the main groups I found as I studied this was a group called the Frankfurt School. How many of you have ever heard of the Frankfurt School? Most people haven't. I never have had. Well, the Frankfurt School was a group of intellectuals in the 1930s. They were over in Germany, and when the war started going and stuff, John Dewey, how many of you have heard of John Dewey, who's the father of public education in America? He brought these intellectuals to America and dropped them down at all our top universities, Berkeley, Brandeis, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, all of them. And their intent was this. Willie Munzenberg, who was one of their leaders, he said, quote, we're going to make the West so corrupt it stinks. We're just going to rot them from the inside out through education and media. That was their goal. That's what we're going to do. We're just going to rot them to the core, and they will just collapse from within. And that's the father of public education. He's the one that brought them over here. But of course, he was a radical. He was a member of the Socialist Society in America. He was one of the authors and signers of the Humanist Manifesto in 1933. Do you know what the Humanist Manifesto, the seventh plank is? Now listen to this. This is 1933 America. This is the father of public education. And see if you can figure out which direction he's going to head our entire system, even way back then, to start undermining what we believe and why we believe it. The seventh plank says this: religion consists of those actions, purposes, and experiences which are humanly significant. Nothing human is alien to the religious. It includes labor, art, science, philosophy, love, friendship, recreation, all that is in its degree expressive of intelligent, satisfying human living. The distinction between the sacred and the secular can no longer be maintained. What he was saying there, if you go on to read the whole thing, is he said, we are humanists. That is our religion. That is what we believe. That's our belief. Even the Supreme Court has said humanism is a religion. Okay, of course, it's taught in our public schools, but that's what they were humanists. And he said, we can no longer keep our humanism to ourselves. It needs to penetrate every aspect of our lives. Art, science, philosophy, love, friendship, it needs to permeate our beliefs. We can't separate the sacred, our beliefs of humanism, and the secular anymore. We need to start living like humanists if we really believe this. Well, of course, at that very same time is about when the Christians started doing the exact opposite. They finally bought the lie the liberals were telling us, hey, Jesus is okay, the Bible says stuff, as long as he stays inside the four church walls, and we don't want to hear about it. Don't you bring that up outside the four church walls. It's 1 hour on Sunday, that's it. And we're like, oh, okay, yeah, we'll be quiet. We started coming back hiding in the churches, and then the vacuum that was formed, they just filled. They took over our schools, they took over Hollywood, they took over the media, everything that we had normally been doing, the church and the Christian individuals. And it's been devastating ever since. The Humanist Manifesto 2, which was written in 1973, 40 years later, after they'd made tremendous progress, they said, okay, now we need to step it up a notch. They defined it here what is going on, what has been going on, and what will continue to go on unless we stand up with courage for what is good and right and true. We either stand up for the biblical principles that this nation was founded upon and that God always blesses with the fruit of freedom and liberty and blessings, or we don't. But they understood the battle we were in. Listen to this. They said, this is John Dunphy with the Humanist Manifesto 2. I am convinced that the battle for humankind's future must be waged and won in the public school classroom by teachers that correctly perceive their role as proselytizers of a new faith, a religion of humanity that recognizes and respects the spark of what theologians call divinity in every human being. The classroom must and will become an arena of conflict between the old and the new. We don't have to guess what they're going to explain to us what the old and the new is. Here's the old. The old is the rotting corpse of Christianity, together with all its adjacent evils and misery, and the new faith of humanism. These are the people that are in charge of our schools and our universities. They train the teachers at our teacher colleges, and we wonder why what has happened to America has happened. It shouldn't be a surprise at all. Most people have been asleep the last 40 years just to finally be wakened up by a president that is pushing a socialist agenda, and we're behind. We have a lot of work to do, and we need to be involved in what's going on, because I think what they have done by removing the church has been the most devastating thing that's happened to our country. Goal number 27, in fact, they said, in 1958, they said, we want to infiltrate the churches and replace revealed religion with social religion. Discredit the Bible. They knew they got to get the Bible. You can't have a book from God of absolute truth. You got to get that thing out of there and get the church focused on social things, the do-gooder stuff, and just a social club. Don't get them, the revealed religion. Don't get them, all tied up in that. But of course, if you look at the church today, the evangelical church in America, they have been incredibly successful. Most of the churches in America, it's a rock concert and then a 10-minute sermonette. You think that's going to build warriors for Jesus Christ? Of course not. It's crazy. What are we thinking? And then the pastors like the Rick Warrens that are leaving. He has 35,000 pastors in America that download his sermon notes every single week. And what do they do on Sunday nights now? Instead of studying God's word, they sort their trash because they're trying to save the planet instead of save lost souls. But we've allowed them just to take it away. Most of our seminaries, the vast majority, almost 80% of all of our evangelical seminaries in America do not even believe the Bible is the inerrant word of God anymore. 80% of them. So of course you're turning out a pastor that's worrying about building a big church instead of a holy church. Because that's all it's about. It's business. You're not sheep, you're customers. And the bigger the church, the more powerful you are, and it's very attractive to the flesh. And that's what they've done. I think goal number 28, when I read this one, I don't know, it's kind of the one God used to convict me and stirred my heart that I need to do something. I don't know what I can do, but I have to do something. God has blessed me with a wonderful wife and 9 wonderful children. And I know if America continues down the road it is heading, they're going to live in a nightmare. And so are your children and your grandchildren. And I said, I'm happy to do whatever you want me to do. And that's when he told me to make the film. But I just realized we have to do something. Do you realize the great sacrifice that has been paid for us to sit here tonight and talk about anything we want to talk about? Watch any movie we want to watch or do whatever we want to do? There was hundreds of thousands of boys buried all over this world so we can do that. And it is a slap in their face when we are so lazy and apathetic to what's going on. We don't have time and we don't have resources to help those that are standing up for the truth, to support good organizations like American Family Association and American Decency Association, things like that. We need to be we're in a war. We're in a battle. And most of us are on the sideline watching TV or playing golf or doing whatever we do. We can't do that any longer. We cannot. Because if we do, we will lose this country. And then you know what's going to happen? We're going to get exactly what we deserve. And I don't want that to happen, especially for our children. Goal number 28 was eliminate prayer or any phase of religious expression in the schools on the ground that it violates the principles of separation of church and state. Now, I read that, and all of a sudden something hit my mind. I said, yeah, that's what the Supreme Court decided. But I said, wait a minute. This goal was written in 1958. And it wasn't until 1962 that the Supreme Court took prayer of our public schools. And when it did, it was the first case in American history that no precedents were given for their decision. They didn't say, oh, because of this case, and this case, we got to take prayer out. He said, no, we're taking prayer out. And they said, why? They said, because we believe it violates the principles of separation of church and state. Almost word for word what this goal had said 4 years earlier. And I don't know about you, that somehow hit me and it stirred my heart. I said, it sounds crazy, it sounds nutty, but there is no way that some little fringe minority could have so much influence. But I'm telling you this, you cannot have a list of this specific of 45 goals. They're very specific, all 45 of them. I've just read you a couple of them. You can't have a kind of list like that are all radical goals in 1958 too. Radical. When I interviewed Ed Meese and Phyllis Schlafly, some of them, I said, did you read The Naked Communist? Have you read it? And they all said, of course. I go, when did you read it? Right when it came out. And I said, what did you think about that list when you read it? And they all very soberly looked me in the eyes and said, we thought that will never happen in America. But you know what followed that up? With a flush face and a very sober attitude, they said, yet it's all happened in our lifetime. It's incredible what they have done and how they've done it. A lot of people also go, well, where is all this heading? What do we do and where's this heading? How many of you heard of George Bernard Shaw? He was a famous socialist. He was one of the founding members of the Fabian Socialist Society, which is a group that has had tremendous influence since 1883 throughout the world in promoting socialism. In fact, they said their goal, they loved Stalin and the communism and stuff, but they said, our goal, instead of using revolution to create a socialist world, we're going to use evolution. We're going to penetrate the cultures in all the countries of the world and slowly push them towards socialism. And they have been so effective. They are still very, very powerful today, a behind-the-scenes group that no one even pays attention to. But George Bernard Shaw was one of their founding members. And when he was asked, what is socialism? This was his answer. This is where we are heading. This is his answer. Socialism means equality of income or nothing. Under socialism, you would not be allowed to be poor. You would be forcibly fed, clothed, lodged, taught, employed, whether you like it or not. If it were discovered that you had not character enough to be worth all this trouble, you might possibly be executed in a kindly manner. But while you were permitted to live, you would have to live well. If you really dissect that there, do you understand where their whole mentality is coming from? While you were permitted to live, who is permitting you to live? They are, government. It's not a gift from God, it's a gift from government. And if you don't go along with the game plan, then they'll execute you in a kindly manner. A lot of people think, because we don't want to believe it, America would never get like that. That's not going to happen in America. But unfortunately, there's other countries in the world that are further down the road than we are. One of them is Belgium. And a survey was done just a couple years ago of the nurses in Belgium. And you know what they found? They found that in this survey, 50% of the nurses in Belgium admitted to administering lethal drugs to their patients without their knowledge. 50% of the nurses, because they don't have the funds to take care of them. And they got to put them out of their misery, kindly. But that's where this always ends. Socialism always ends in that direction. If Obamacare continues, that's where it always ends. You know why? Because it has to. When you're in a socialist system, you do run out of money. We're not even quite in a socialist system yet. We're in a big government system, and we're already running out of money. But once you take on the socialist type mentality of the big government, there comes a point where when the 60-year-old has cancer and the 5-year-old, they say, hey, we'd love to help both of them, but we simply don't have the money. We can't. So who should we give the treatment to? And we all say, oh, we would never be presented that kind of choice. But we will be. And guess what? This is the biggest problem of all. I bet you that question right there, if you presented it to Americans today that are under the age of 40 years old, the majority would, of course, say the 5-year-old because they still have their whole life in front of them. But they would say that without much trouble. Because of the moral relativistic society they've been raised in, there really is no right and wrong. There is no evil. If you have to do that, do it kindly. Don't make anyone suffer, but just do that. I mean, a couple years ago, I live in Idaho. A couple years ago in the state right next to us in Oregon, a lady who had worked for the government her whole life was retired, 60 years old, and was diagnosed with cancer. And they already have state health care there, and they've had it for years in Oregon. Well, she went in to go get her treatment. They said, we don't have the money, sorry. She goes, what do you mean? She goes, we've got 2 options, but we can't do the chemotherapy and stuff. We don't have the funds for that. It's a tight year. You can either have painkillers or doctor-assisted suicide. That's in America 2 years ago. They would not give her treatment. See, we can't afford that. You're too old to make it worthwhile for the amount of money we'd have to spend on that. It's where it's going. And it's where it always goes. That's another thing. We don't have to guess where this goes. It always goes the same direction because man, as we know as being Christians, is naturally evil. And he loves power, he loves control, and he always abuses it. You look just at the 20th century, we see that every time government became big and powerful, it was a disaster for the people that lived underneath it. There's never been an example in all world history of big government that didn't destroy its own people and abuse them. And so that's the battle we're in. And it's a tough thing because we're a little behind in being involved. But I want to encourage you a couple things here before I close. One is, more than anything else, I encourage you, if you still have the potential to have a relationship and influence over your children or your grandchildren, you live close enough to do that, or please do that. There's nothing more important in the world than you could do than that. Spend time with them, get to know them if you don't, and start to teach them and train them, and let them see the big picture of the battle we are in. I think it'll give them a vision of the great things that God can do through them if they'll simply follow him and they'll do what he wants them to do. Secondly, I encourage you to be involved in what's going on with your time and your resources. The statistics are clear. I mean, only 48% of Christians in America, people that call themselves Christians, are even registered to vote. And of those, only 50% vote. So 75% of people that would classify themselves as Christians don't even take the time to vote. It's mind-boggling. We're supposed to be the salt and the light. The salt to preserve the society, and the light to expose the darkness and the evil and spread the truth. And we're not even going to vote, so we're going to allow someone that is evil and vile to come in and turn our entire country and our children against all the biblical principles that they should be learning, but they're not. I think I've got so many things different things I could talk about. I'm going to close with a poem. And it's my favorite poem. I memorized it about 30 years ago when I was in college. But it was written 100 years ago. But I want you to listen to it carefully because it describes exactly today where we are. I mean, it sounds like it was written last week, but it's 100 years old. And the good news of that on one hand is it made me realize, you know what? Man's always been battling these things. Man trying to abuse his power over man. Those that are evil and corrupt and rotten trying to just take over and influence others. And so it's not a new battle we're in, but just in America, it was never able to have the influence that it did because the churches stood against it. The pastors were the first line of defense in this country. And 100 years ago, you try to put something bad in a local store or a local school, you would have had every denomination of Christian church pastor out there on the lawn saying, you will not do that, period. Do you understand that? It'll mean war if you do. And guess who'd be just standing right behind them? Their entire congregations. That's why these evil men that have always been around weren't able to be successful in America, because the pastor stood up, and that helped the congregation stand up, and there was a powerful force to be reckoned with. If you tried to pervert the innocence of our children, we didn't allow it. And yet today we do. With the garbage that's on TV, the Hollywood movies, the music, the educational system, it is all vile and corrupt to the core, and we are allowing them to brainwash and indoctrinate our sweet, dear children and grandchildren. Well, we must not do it anymore. This poem is called The Gods of the Copybook Headings, and it's by Rudyard Kipling. And what it is, he is like Father Time in the poem, and he's looking throughout all ages and times, and what he's comparing is two things. How many of you know what a copybook is? Okay, just a couple people. In early American history, in all our schools, the students had books called copybooks. And what they were is books they'd open up, and at the top of each page, there would be a proverb. You know, the wages of sin is death, whatever. And to learn their penmanship, they would have to copy that down on all 25 lines of the page. So they would learn their penmanship in the process, but of course they'd also learn that truth. Because after writing it down 25 times in a row, the wages of sin is death, they would memorize that. So it was a very creative and clever way to kill two birds with one stone. Well, he compares that. He compares the gods of the copybook headings, those things of truth that stand the test of time, to the gods of the marketplace, the things of man that always promise a lot, but they never deliver, and they always fold in a matter of time. And this is how the poem goes. As I pass through my incarnations in every age and race, I make my proper prostrations to the gods of the marketplace. Peering through reverent fingers, I watch them flourish and fall, but the gods of the copybook headings I noticed outlasted them all. We were living in trees when they met us, and they showed us each in turn that water would certainly wet us and fire would certainly burn, but we found them lacking in uplift, vision, and breadth of mind, so we left them to teach the gorillas while we followed the march of mankind. We moved as the Spirit listed. They never altered their pace, being neither cloud nor windborne like the gods of the marketplace, but they always caught up with our progress, and presently word would come that a tribe had been wiped off its ice field, or the lights had gone out in Rome. With all the hopes our world is built on, they were utterly out of touch. They denied that the moon was Stilton, which is a blue cheese. They denied she was even Dutch. They denied that wishes were horses. They denied that a pig had wings. So we followed the gods of the market who promised us these beautiful things. When the Cambrian measures were forming, they promised perpetual peace. They swore if we gave them our weapons, the wars of the tribes would cease. But when we disarmed, they sold us and delivered us bound to our foe. And the gods of the copybook heading said, stick to the devil, you know. On the first feminine sandstones, we were promised the fuller life, which started by loving our neighbor and ended by loving his wife, till our women had no more children and our men lost reason and faith. And the gods of the copybook heading said, the wages of sin is death. In the Carboniferous epoch, we were promised abundance for all by robbing selected Peter to pay for collective Paul. But though we had plenty of money, there was nothing our money could buy. And the gods of the copybook heading said, if you don't work, you die. Then the gods of the market tumbled, and their smooth-tongued wizards withdrew. And the hearts of the meanest were humbled and began to believe it was true, that all is not gold that glitters, and 2 and 2 makes 4. And the gods of the copybook headings limped up to explain it once more. As it will be in the future, it was at the birth of man. There are only 4 things certain since social progress began: that a dog returns to his vomit, and that a sow returns to her mire, and the fool's burnt bandaged finger goes wobbling back to the fire. And after all this is accomplished and the brave new world begins, when all men are paid for existing and no man must pay for his sins, as surely as water will wet us and as surely as fire will burn, the gods of the copybook headings with terror and slaughter return. You can never defy God's principles and not reap what you sow, period. No one can do that, whether you believe in God or whether you do or you don't. We have as a nation for many years now, and we're reaping what we have sown. But he is a very loving God, and he is so long-suffering that I know if his people will turn back with a repentant heart and start doing the things we should do, we know are right, quit wasting our time, and get involved in this fight for our children and our grandchildren's future and their very souls by what they're being taught, my hope and prayer is he will have mercy on us. And he will allow us to take back the land so that he can be glorified. Because don't you forget it for 1 minute. This is all about Jesus Christ and nothing else. Why do we want to raise our children properly? So they can glorify him. Why do we want to get this country back the way it should be? Because it glorifies him. He is everything. And we need to start acting like that and living like that. Nothing is more important. Thank you so much.